To start with, this is my BP_enemy_slime, which is exactly the same as the boss, apart from the boss can take further health away from the player. Now let's begin with the damage bit, since this runs on every tick. Essentially, to begin with, it has a sequence which later on does a quick direction check to make sure it is going the right way after interacting with the player. So the first bit goes into a delay and ends up going into a branch, which essentially says, is the player overlapping with the enemy? If true, then cast to the BP_player and take 2.6 damage out of the 100 that the player has, and the casting bit is essentially just to command it to do the damage sequence on the player health on BP_player. Next, here we have the code for the fireball and hitbox overlap, which starts with an on component begin overlap, with the component being the hitbox. Next it goes into the cast to BP_player, which goes into a boolean which is activated and is the way it goes if it is interacting with the player. This bit connects up to the previous bit, which was to take health away from player, but here there is a cast failed, and if that is to happen, then it will cast to the BP_player_fireball and take 50 health from the enemy. On the component end overlap, this will stop taking health away from the player because the player is no longer overlapping with the enemy hitbox. This next one is for take enemy health and will subsequently take health away from the enemy when activated. First, this starts by going into a float, which is where an integer value is stored and subtracts the health away from the enemy, and afterwards it checks to see if the float value is less than or equal to 0 before destroying the enemy. Next now is the custom event earlier for the enemy direction check, which goes into a sequence and first which leads to a condition branch node. The condition is to check to see if the velocity of the character movement is above or equal to 0, and if so it's moving right, otherwise if it is -0, then it's not moving right and subsequently moving left. The next part to this sequence node is to check to see if the slime flipbook is moving right, and if so then it is to change it based on these A and B directions, with A being positive and meaning forward, while the B means negative and means going the other way. Lastly is the construction script, which is for the interp to movement part of the enemy. Let's begin with this construction script node that goes into a float with a target on interp to movement. Essentially, the duration here of enemy movement duration is being stored in the float with the target for it being interp to movement. Next it goes into an interp control points, which is the way the character moves back and forth on the set plane.